following is a CUNY TV special presentation.
It is now my pleasure to introduce the United States Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. As you all know, the senator was sworn in January of 2009, and then in November of 2010, she won re-election to the seat with an overwhelming majority. Prior to her service in the Senate, Kirsten served in the House of Representatives, representing New York's 20th Congressional District. In the Senate, the senator has led the fight to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and has been a leader and advocate for New York's first responders, for building the national economy, and for creating jobs for New Yorkers. We are lucky to have such a strong and smart and hardworking proponent fighting for us in Washington. Every time ABNY has gone down to Washington, the senator is the first person we meet and the last person we see at the end of our long day. Her door is always open and there for advice and guidance as we try to push New York's agenda forward. The last time the senator spoke was literally a week after her appointment to the Senate by then Governor David Paterson. We are eager to hear an update on Congress, as well as your thoughts, Senator, on New York's economy, our recovery, and obviously what's going on in the political world. We are thrilled to welcome you back to ABNY. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand.
Good morning, everyone. It is such an honor and a privilege to be here. I can't thank you, Bill, for all of your friendship, leadership, support. It's been such a privilege to be here. Many of you were here for my first speech just after I was appointed. And while a lot has happened since that time, I feel just as humbled and as privileged as I felt then to be able to talk to an extraordinary group of New Yorkers who care so much about our great city. I first want to say a few things about Bill. Bill has truly carried out the bold vision of his father, Lou, by showing such extraordinary strength and leadership and dedication during times of great crisis and great need in our city. The work that you have done, and so many of the people in this room have done, not only to rebuild Lower Manhattan, but to look how to move this city forward in a stronger and better way. But it's your vision, it's your drive, it's your commitment to making New York a better place that keeps our great city great. So thank you, Bill, for all that you do. And it's the same sense of common purpose that's shared in this room today that we frankly need so much more of in Washington. With an economy that has been slow to recover and truly an economic crisis that's rivaled only by the Great Depression, with 1 in 5 people in this city living below the poverty line, and middle-class families across our state getting squeezed more and more every day. What do we see in Washington? Unfortunately, endless gridlock, endless political posturing, endless partisan bickering. I haven't been in Washington very long, but I've been there long enough to know that it is broken. And the 3 short years since I've stood with you, I'm sorry to say that Washington actually has become more dysfunctional. Just look at how Congress ended the last session. Another deadline, another manufactured crisis by the leadership of the House of Representatives, who are either unwilling or unable to govern. Rather than protect 160 million middle-class Americans from higher taxes, including thousands of families across this city and state, there were House members who would prefer to play high-stake poker. But this should never have been the game when $7.1 billion of hard-earned New York taxpayer dollars were at stake. New Yorkers expect better. New Yorkers deserve better. Because we know that what ordinary New Yorkers do when they face a crisis. Look at the first responders after 9/11. We saw such extraordinary outpouring of support for them and their families. Look at what's happened most recently with the death of Officer Peter Fogoski. How much support has poured out all across this city for his 4 daughters. Over $2 million raised for their education in just weeks. We see it every single day when New Yorkers look at the problems in front of us and they come together to solve them in a way that makes us stronger. And that's truly the spirit of ABNY, and I'm extraordinarily grateful for your continued commitment. So when we're looking at the jobs crisis in Washington, we have to look for that spirit of a common shared goal, common values that can bring us together, common beliefs that make the difference in how we are going to solve these tough problems. And I've seen that. I've seen us make a difference in policy and moving things forward by finding those core common values. We did it with the 9/11 health bill. Senator Schumer, our congressional delegation led by Chairman Rangel, all of us came together and we focused our efforts on what we agreed on. Where was our common place? These were the men and women who raced up towers when people were coming down. These were the men and women who sacrificed everything to be there, to find survivors, to find remains, and then to do the awful cleanup. And in their time of great need, how could we deny them and not stand behind them? And that was the common belief, that common core value that we shared as Democrats and Republicans. And when we passed that bill on the last day of the Congress, we passed it with unanimous consent. We also saw it in the 17-year-long effort to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Now, you know, in that legislation, we were denying men and women the ability to serve this country based on who they love. You can't imagine a more corrosive, discriminatory, negative policy that undermined not only our military readiness as a nation, but who we are as a nation. And so we came together to, again, repeal that discriminatory policy based on the core belief that people should be able to serve this country and die for this country because they're Americans. Now, I know that we can find these common core values in Washington because we've done it time and time again, not just with the 9/11 health bill and the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but in some areas of policy, there are so much that we share in common. National security is one area. Another area is the safety and well-being of our children. So, for example, I've been able to work across party lines on issues that relate to Israel and Israel's security. Mark Kirk, who's a Republican from Illinois, has time and time again sponsored legislation with me to make sure that we can crack down on Iran's nuclear ambitions to militarize their nuclear capabilities through tough sanctions. Time and time again, we've written bipartisan letters to decry Durban 1 and make sure that we didn't participate in Durban 2 and Durban 3. We did the same exact thing with the Goldstone report. Bipartisan letters from the Senate to the administration, to the public, saying these are things we will not tolerate based on our national security concerns. When it comes to our kids, there's no issue that we can't come to find common ground. Something as simple as drop-side cribs, that babies were dying because they got stuck in between these two parts of a crib, we were able to ban those on a bipartisan basis. We were able to look at things like children's nutrition. We have some of the highest obesity rates in this country in New York City because of the foods that these kids don't have access to. They don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. They don't have a good kind of food being served in their cafeterias every day. So on something simple like that, we could come together and decide how do we make sure we address this obesity epidemic. Things like the FAA regulations. You know, we suffered greatly in New York when that aircraft came down in Buffalo and families from our state suffered such horrible losses because these pilots didn't have the training that they needed. So when we look at the FAA, we say clearly there can be common ground on finding how we train our pilots to make sure they can handle all conditions. We did the same thing after Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee. The devastation across our state, across the country, because of these difficult storms is extraordinary. Whole families losing their homes, their farms, their businesses. And so we came together as a Congress to pass the kinds of funds that these families need. So when we start this new Congress later this month, I want to try to harness that spirit and that urgency to change the way Washington works. We can start by making sure Congress plays by the exact same rules that everybody else plays. I don't know if you read about that story saying that members of Congress don't have to follow the same insider trading rules as everyone else. Well, it's quite hard to believe, but we want to make sure that members of Congress, their families, their staff, cannot use non-public information that's gained through their congressional jobs to profit. Clearly, no one should be above the rules. And I believe we can pass a very strong bipartisan bill on that issue this year. We also have to make sure we look at the influence of special interest groups and the current status where they can spend unlimited amounts of money through advocacy without any disclosure. So sure, you can spend millions of dollars putting up ads, but if the public doesn't know where that money's coming from or what your interests are in putting those ads on television, that's just not right. So I'm working on a reform plan that I'll be announcing later this month that will make sure we can actually monitor and control the amount of money that can be raised and spent on federal elections, including the independent expenditures through the super PACs that allow these individuals to spend unlimited amounts of money without any transparency. My plan to change Washington also takes our government out of these dusty basements and the dark ages by basically putting information on the internet. What a revolutionary idea. But the case today is that it's not readily accessible. So we want to make sure that every document, every public document, every committee vote, every congressional research report is searchable on the internet for the public to see. And that just gets the truth of what we're working on being publicly available and readily accessible. By making Congress more transparent, more accessible, and more accountable, we can get to the real business at hand. Now, obviously, none of this will be easy, and I'm sure that many of my colleagues will disagree with me, but they also disagreed with me when I first came to Congress. When I was elected in 2006, I was the first member of Congress to put on the internet my schedule, all the meetings I had taken with any interest group, so that my constituents would understand if I've met with one side of the debate, I could just as easily meet with the other side of the debate. I put all my financial disclosures online, and I put all my earmark requests online. That kind of transparency can make a difference, and now just a few years later, that is normal practice in the House of Representatives. Now, obviously, with this kind of transparency, we have to focus on building more confidence in the system. And I think that that's what will allow us to begin to look at the toughest job at hand, which is the economy. And I know that government does not create jobs. People and businesses and ideas create jobs. But Congress does need to create the environment in which we can create a growing economy. And we have a mandate from the American people to find these core common values about how we can proceed, how we can move forward, and how we can create this climate. There's obviously no silver bullet, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Just look at the diversity of New York State's economy. I was born and raised in upstate New York, and I worked for over a decade here in New York City. And I understand the economic principles of this state are as diverse as the people who make it the greatest place on earth. But that doesn't mean the focus on one part of our economy has to come at the expense of another part of the economy. We can look to upstate New York and Long Island as the future nanotech, biotech, and energy technology capitals of the world. We have companies all across our state and institutions like the Roswell Institute, Brookhaven Labs, AMD, Intel, GE, and Corning, among many, many others that are right now leading the cutting edge in research, high-tech investments, and next-generation manufacturing. And we can do this at the very same time that we are supporting a thriving industry here in New York City. We are becoming the new technological powerhouse, providing an East Coast sister for Silicon Valley. Homegrown companies like Gilt Group, Tumblr, Foursquare were nurtured by the assets of this city. We have now become a top destination for companies like Facebook, world-class universities, like the transformational project that Cornell University and Technion Institute will be building right here on Roosevelt Island. And this is just the beginning. I believe that we can continue to move forward in this direction by redesigning a currently unused building on J Street in downtown Brooklyn into a new applied science center. What it does is create a hub for science and technology right here in Brooklyn, flourishing a new digital district, which will spur growth and innovation and generation of new talent here in New York, not only as we construct a new facility, but as we begin to grow this industry. From training our workforce for the jobs of the future to opening access for capital for small businesses to keeping New York the fashion industry of the world, we need legislation, investments, tax credits, so that we can see just 3 words again: made in America. Another very common sense idea that I think would be so important for New York is a national infrastructure bank. Now, this is not a Democratic idea or a Republican idea. It is just a good idea. As we know in New York, our roads, bridges, highways, sewers, ports desperately need investment. Many of them are crumbling right before our eyes. And fixing these is not just an economic issue about how do we create jobs now and economic growth later. It's also an issue of public safety. But a national infrastructure bank will allow for direct private equity investment into these long-term, large-scale infrastructure projects. It'll be a vehicle for investment for pension funds, for life insurance companies, for private equity, and the trillions of dollars that's sitting on the sidelines of our economy today. I think it's a vehicle whereby we can invest in both traditional infrastructure and new infrastructure. We can do high-speed rail. We could do rural broadband. We could do healthcare IT. We could do a new electric grid. All of these kinds of investments create long-term growth opportunities. And instead of being run at the whim of politicians that come and go, a national infrastructure bank would be run by a nonpartisan board of directors, similar to the Federal Reserve, experts serving terms well beyond any campaign cycle. And it would be like having a capital budget, just like states and businesses do, not necessarily an operating budget that's being run through the appropriations process. So the idea could really make a difference. And when you look at history, infrastructure has not been a Democratic idea or a Republican idea. It really is a nonpartisan idea. For example, Republican President Dwight D. Eisenhower created the National Highway System, and it was President Ronald Reagan who increased the investment in it when he was president to maintain it. This is a basic public-private partnership that cuts government spending. It also takes pressure off states and local governments and takes pressure off our property taxes to do some of these long-term, large-scale infrastructure projects. And when you reduce the government's role in spending, you can take the politics out of the process so that many of these projects can actually move forward. It's also not an abstract idea. These are projects across our state that we actually think about and talk about all the time. For example, projects like investing in Hunts Point. I went up to see it. It is an incredible opportunity for New York. Right now, it needs about a $30 million modernization investment for its freight and rail lines to improve its roadways and to improve the amount of produce that can come in and out of New York City. The markets are such a huge potential, and if we invest in it, we can continue to see long-term growth. They estimate it would boost annual sales by $3 billion for local wholesalers and growers as a result of increasing its distribution networks. Projects in upstate New York, like the Port of Oswego, an investment of only $100 million for infrastructure improvements would increase the port's capacity to be an international destination for loading and unloading of raw materials for distribution, not just throughout our state, but throughout the whole country. Long Island, as you know, we have so many infrastructure needs, whether it's transportation related or building basic sewers and water infrastructure. Tens of thousands of jobs are created for every $1 billion that's invested. So it's something that makes such a difference in the ability to create jobs now and make our state the shining example of the greatness that it's always been. Now, it shouldn't come as a surprise that one of our biggest problems in Washington is that politicians are always waiting for the last minute to do anything that is needed. And it's really stifling businesses because, as you know, as many of the people in this room know, you cannot run a business when you don't have certainty. You cannot make decisions about short-term and long-term investments if you don't know the rules of the road, if you don't know what tax credits you're going to be given, if you don't know where your investment's going to come from, if you don't know what the regulatory landscape's going to look like. How are you supposed to get your business to grow? How are you supposed to create jobs? Unfortunately, members of Congress sometimes just don't get it. So we have to do much more in terms of offering these very significant ideas. I'm really tired of hearing politicians who call themselves pro-business but understand not how actually businesses are run. So we want to make sure we can create this certainty in the market. One of the easiest and best ideas is to make sure that we extend the R&D tax credit. Now, the R&D tax credit is the easiest investment vehicle that gives a business certainty to invest in research and development. That tax credit should be made permanent. And it's not something that hasn't had its consequences. 30 years ago, the US was the global leader in tax policy that encouraged investment and innovation. Today, we've fallen to number 17, opening the doors for countries like China and India to take the lead. And I can think of no good reason why US markets, US inventors, US investment is falling behind. It's frankly inexcusable. And we have a bipartisan bill right now that's ready to go to make the R&D tax credit permanent. Another bipartisan bill that I think could help New York City is increasing our investment in real estate. Trillions of dollars in commercial real estate loans are on the cusp of maturing, and if borrowers can't secure the funding that they need when it's time to make payments, businesses will fail. And we can prevent this by increasing investment into real estate. And one of the things we can do is change the laws that dictate who's allowed to invest, and that would be amending the FIRPTA rules to allow for more foreign investment into the US real estate market. So this is something that I think can move in this Congress, something that's a very nonpartisan idea and would increase a lot more investment in New York and our state. Now, the last idea I want to leave you with is one that I'm very, very passionate about because it's really about who I am as a person. I want to focus our efforts on empowering more women to succeed in our economy and be a greater part of our national decision making. Go girls. Now, interestingly, women make up more than half of our college graduates right now, more than half of our advanced degrees in this country. Women start their small businesses with 8 times less capital than male-owned business, but they're among the fastest growing in the small business sector. But despite these facts, less than 3% of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies are women, and only 16% of the women on Fortune 500 boards are women. But the studies show that when you have diversity on your boards, when you have voices of women, those companies have better returns on equity, better returns on investment. And now in our economy, with more dual income households than ever, our incentive to increase a growing economy by empowering women and giving them opportunities within the workforce is a win-win idea for everyone. If we're ever going to out-innovate, out-educate, out-compete other countries, we are only going to be successful if it's women leading the way. Women still face many challenges within the workplace, but we also have so many opportunities. I think what our country needs is a Rosie the Riveter for this generation. Now, if you remember Rosie the River, an iconic advertising campaign that were asking women to enter the workforce during World War II because they needed women to work in the manufacturing companies to build the guns to fight the war. And because of that effort, 6 million women entered the workforce by the end of World War II. We need the same kind of call to action, the same kind of call to action to ask women to be part of the decision-making fabric of this country, whether it's on corporate boards or whether it's in politics, because we need their ideas, we need their expertise, we need their experiences, and we need their ideas. So I just feel that if we can do this, I feel if we can do this as a priority as a community here in New York, we can make a huge difference. And perhaps the person who said it best was someone that was very loved by a lot of the people in this room. We all mourned her passing at Geraldine Ferrara's funeral. But Geraldine said it best. If you remember her convention speech in 1984, she said, "It's not what America can do for women, it's what women can do for America." And so I hope that today will be the beginning of an effort that you will all share with me so we can truly see America's potential. Thank you.